Hey, what is up, guys? It's Aniki here. So, this video is a little different because it kind of focuses on just some observations I've made of the story, but also in comparison to other manga. So, we're actually going to be discussing more than just My Hero today in the sense of that I'm going to be using them as comparative points for narrative structures for different characters within the context of the series. And so, I've been seeing a lot of that Return of the Blonde Sasuke talk, and if you have been here since the beginning, you know that I actually really hate that meme because it's like a oversimplification of both the characters' writing, and in all honesty, the only narrative things they really have in common is that they're like rivals to the main character. Um, like their dispositions, character goals, um, like reasons for going into these fields are all inherently like structurally different, and it's kind of fascinating to me that this even like caught on. And so I got myself a stiff drink poured. I'm not gonna tell you what's in here because YouTube. Hey, look at that, United States of Smash. And I'm gonna just kind of like real quick establish something very important, which is that Bakugo is inherently not a Sasuke character, but rather if you're going to use the bare surface level checklist, it's going to be Shoto, who is introduced as a rival who basically tells Deku to fuck off and that he's not interested in making any friends. Same way that Sasuke didn't actually care to become friends with anybody in class because he was there to get stronger. In the same way, Shoto's there to get stronger. They're both driven in part by like spiting family members. They've both got the fire powers. They're both more powerful than the MC upon introduction. They both have a tendency to like be independent in the sense that like they'll move ahead of people. Like Sasuke went after Gaara, didn't like necessarily wait for a team. You already know that like Shoto will just like ran off when Endeavor as soon as from Endeavor as soon as he got that message from Izuku where Stain was, even if he didn't know that that's where it was, that didn't matter. He was just boom, I'm doing my thing. And so they both got that, there's this whole structure. But the thing is that I like the fact that even though Shoto is much more on the surface like Sasuke, they both deviate so fast, so quickly as characters that people don't feel the need to make that comparison. However, when in the context of Bakugo, he's looked at as the Sasuke only because he's an aggressive rival towards the main character, when that's Sasuke's character is way more than just aggressive towards the main character as a rival. And I got to thinking about how the reality is though is that there is like the Naruto Sasuke dynamic does exist within My Hero Academia. In this context, the Bakugo is the Naruto. Bakugo being a character who is loud and brash, who seeks to be the pinnacle of his country's fighter, who is a blonde-haired, kind of a delinquent when you think about the amount of trouble that Naruto was getting into, and the fact that in the manga, uh, one of his friends was trying to get him to sneak into a bar, so that means like they kind of do reckless stuff. And he's not necessarily like a straight shooter from back then. And so Bakugo was just trying to make sure he had kept his record clean going in as he was applying the UA. And so you've got both of these personalities that are like high energy, high octane, always trying to prove to people that they're the best. Like Naruto's always like, "Yo, if you want to fight me, I gotta let you know right now. I gotta let you know I'm gonna be Hokage, bro. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm about to be the number one leader of the village. Alright, you feel me? Now, and in the same way, Bakugo's like, yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass. I'm here to do that. I'm gonna be the number one hero, so I can't lose here. Let's throw down. I'll actually explosion box you, bro." And so you have that same setup though between Bakugo and Naruto. I mean Bakugo and Shoto that you have between Sasuke and Naruto in the sense that Shoto and Sasuke come from pedigree. They are both established bloodlines within the context of the universe, powerful bloodlines, or they're perceived as that. Uh, Actually, a really solid quirk, so special jutsu passed down. Uh, Shoto is more in line with that, in the same way that like so you've got those similarities that line up. And the thing about it for me is that Shoto has all these characteristics, but due to the fact that his character arc is deeply about properly utilizing his bloodline and accepting who he is, it quickly turns away from the Sasuke narrative, going in the complete opposite direction to a certain degree of not being an Avenger story anymore, but rather a story about a person getting past their need to seek revenge. And so I think the fact that Shoto's character arc derives so far away is what allows us to see him not as Sasuke, even though it's the exact same start line and origin. Um, and so both you have the Sasuke origin, you have the Naruto origin, you have Bakugo, you have Shoto. You pair them together, and then you get the same loud, brash Naruto challenging Sasuke, Bakugo challenging Shoto, and both of them kind of not caring for a good chunk of the series. Even now, like Shoto still kind of brushes off like Bakugo being like dog, like we can box. Like he like just like clowned him, kind of like how Sasuke clowned Naruto when he got cut in the Land of Waves during chapter Go Go Slide and Go, where they took down the people, and then after Shoto used a Flash Freeze Heat Wave and took out the main villain. He basically was like, "Oh, so did anybody get hurt? Are you injured, Bakugo? Like, did you get hurt?" And he's like, "No." Like, so like he brings up the fact that that's from the sports festival, etc. And so you have like that like jarring early Naruto rivalry, but the thing is like these characters, because of the way they're so structured with because Bakugo is so much more aggressive, we're seeing the thing is that if you think about it, that's how a lot of people realistically would have perceived Naruto, for in the same way that like you can kind of tell that I can't remember Akuma from Fire Force and then the Night King, they both, one of them is like a bit more goofy at behaving because he's got the weird smile and he's like but they're both ultimately brash, but the Night King dude is like a little pompous and like aloof, and that's like the whole Sasuke Naruto dynamic again within that context. But again, these characters, because they're ambitious in their executions, we don't necessarily go out of our way to make these strong comparisons. That's why I find it fascinating that people don't, if they're going to make the comparisons to Naruto, and they're going to make the comparisons to these other series where they talk about these dichotomies, then it doesn't make sense to me for uh, them to do it incorrectly. In the sense that even the way that Bakugo and Shoto scale is inherently tied together, like the typical like shonen MC. Like when you think about how Asta and Yuno both unlock a bigger form in this arc, but then you look back to like how they're always leveling up next to each other. Like when we finally see, like when Asta finally shows up with his demon form, you see Yuno come up with his Sylph form, and so you have that execution there being the same thing with a loud, brash protagonist type character, really in your face, except in this case, Asta's nice, whereas Bakugo was like brash. And then you have Yuno, who like instead of being aloof is kind of nice, but he's still like the cold, distant, more talented, more popular character, like the same way that Sasuke was like more popular and just Shoto is more popular than Bakugo in the class, and all are considered to be like cute by the girls, etc. So you have the actual same structure, but when it's not from the protagonist perspective, you look at it and you kind of see that like it feels kind of like a gag. And I don't know if Horikoshi is saying that maybe while he loves this dynamic and he enjoys it, he also understands that to a certain degree, these like overly loud and like quiet people just bickering all the time is like kind of like a giant joke. It's like a hilarious dynamic, but like when you have it so enforced in a different way, where we see like from one of their perspectives, like as they're growing along their journey, and then you can kind of see it more as like two people that are like have a strained friendship. But when you just look at Bakugo and Shoto, you're like from the perspective of Deku, from like them being like a third party relationship almost, they become like this weird friction source where you're just kind of like, they don't, Bakugo, chill out, like you don't have to take the challenge so seriously. And then you realize that like that's probably how like Sasuke felt with Naruto, and it really did kind of come off that way. And like sometimes probably feels with Asta. We don't get a lot of insight, so I'm not sure. So like in general, like this dynamics of the talented one that like understands that the other one is like working hard and trying to catch up and like be as good as them, etc. they're like, okay, but like I don't need to hear about it. I get it. And so, and when you look at, for example, Bakugo, when he beat Todoroki, the thing is that he didn't get like the absolution and the confidence that he needed because he, was constantly struggling with his inferiority complex. And if you think about it, back at the first training arc where you see Bakugo versus Deku, the first fight, you actually remember at the end of that, Bakugo says he didn't feel like he could beat the ice guy, and like he couldn't fathom it. And so when he finally got the chance to fight him, that was something that like for over a month he had on his mind, had been like working towards, and had that go unfulfilled because at the end of the day, Shoto didn't do everything in his power to beat him. And so he still doesn't have the answer of whether or not he can actually beat Shoto in his mind because of the fact that Shoto never let him actually fight him. And in the same regard, though, that like Shoto, he's not necessarily that invested in that fight. It doesn't like he doesn't care as much that he lost because he knows he held back, but also that like he just was like too busy like distracted thinking about other stuff. And so he knows his hit in the head wasn't 100% in the game, but he still knows he did a good enough job to put on a good enough showing. He's looking forward and staying calm, keeping his head clear, collected, even though he is a little down. And so when you look at it from that perspective, they have the unfulfilled rivalry where something goes wrong due to an outside force and the victory is cheapened. It would have been like if Naruto would have beat Sasuke when he had the curse mark, or something like that. If Naruto would have found out, he would have felt unfulfilled. And so that's the dynamic that you're seeing. There's like that unfulfilled challenge actually getting to occur. And then you think back to like the training camp is fine. They they don't have a lot there. Like the final exams, they don't have an interaction there. But you have Bakugo swearing he's going to be #1 in the class, like challenging everyone, because he was like the sports festival was like a half-assed victory. So he's like trying to make sure he gets better grades than Shoto. He's also like calling him out there. The focus, the intensity, like the I'm gonna prove myself to you this time. Like Naruto said that kind of stuff to Sasuke. Like Asta is constantly telling that and like validating it based on like the way his power is scaling or whatever. And so you constantly have this sense of like they're going for the same things and you get to the provisional license exam and each one of them had their own like glaring personality flaws because at the end of the day, since them being the top two, they were always at the top of the class. They didn't have to do as much introspecting and working on their own weaknesses, and they had inevitably led to them not evaluating their personality flaws in the way those could be impacting those around them. Shoto not thinking about the way that his cold nature and being so hostile towards the world back then could affect Inasa and how it would play out in the future until that moment, with Bakugo not realizing that the way that he candidly talks to people so flippantly is jarring for people and they don't find that to be very heroic, and he needs to actually work on his approach that Best Genius had warned him about. In the same way though that Endeavor told him he needed to like inherit his legacy back in the sports festival. If you think about it from that perspective, he's also inheriting the consequences of his actions. That's a part of his own personal legacy as well, is causing those problems with Inasa in the first place. So already understanding what the weight of a legacy on a personal level can lead to. So they both fail. They're both stuck doing these provisional license courses together. Shoto has to further expound upon in the remedial courses arc upon his ability to get beyond what his parents taught him, and that's kind of something you see emphasized there, where Bakugo says that's how I was raised, with the violence and the beating. And so Bakugo's not so much going for he is one person who necessarily wants to be like a violent, abusive child, but moreover, rather that's what he's been conditioned to be based on his upbringing at home. So if you factor that in, then you have them both coming to terms with the fact they have character flaws. These are important like moments and arcs where Naruto sets aside his pride, for example, and he asks Sakura for help during the training in the Land of Waves. And then eventually like Shoto warms up and asks for help also. I mean, not Shoto, Sasuke's. And like the thing is that like that was them both going over like a mental hurdle where they needlessly created these gaps for themselves because they were too busy focused on how strong they were. And so that's also why it's important that as you get past the training arc, you get into the remedial course arc. Shoto is shown warming people with his fire. Bakugo is shown, instead of solving problems with his quirk, talking to a child and telling him about how looking down on people is a good way to miss out on your weaknesses and end up coming up short. Now think about that. Bakugo, his strength has always been focused around his quirk, and he's finally excelling and growing in power in his emotions, same way that Naruto had to swallow his pride and allowed him to control his chakra, which is essentially his spirit's energy, which means he brought further stability to himself by doing so, in the same way that Shoto brought more peace to himself by being able to create the slide and then eventually warming the children as they got down. And that's just both of them growing as people. Though he still couldn't necessarily warm up to Endeavor, it's also important to note that that's, in this case, he's the one that ends up being hostile, whereas Bakugo was actually somewhat friendly with Kami by the end of this, though he does call out Meat Boy. And then, of course, we have what happened most recently, where you have like joint training, where they're both actually kind of putting on clinics, but it doesn't matter because of, in Shoto's case, he's fighting somebody who's a counter to him, and then you have one of his combat weaknesses revealed that some of us had already talked about, and it was that he doesn't have hand-to-hand combat, really. And so Tetsu was able to really rush him down, and you have Shoto's, like, finally his combat weakness being revealed, but what you have with Bakugo is him moving past a certain weakness of his own, and that he was working together with his team. And it's always been stated that he was solid combat-wise. He's always been in that position, and due to the nature of his quirk, getting up close has always been a part of his fighting style. So this has benefited him, and so we have something that, like, you get to see Bakugo do better than Shoto in a sense, because he's got a better control of his quirk, and his quirk allows for close combat and actually encourages it, whereas Shoto's power has been allowing him to escape by on just raw pie plates, overwhelming people. But we did see Shoto establish what his plan is for New Heights. That's to get better with his powers, to train with his father, which is undoubtedly going to come with hand-to-hand combat training as well, because that's going to be the only way to properly utilize actual punching techniques usefully in this verse. I'm positive, because he's not going to just let him just throw them like all willy-nilly, especially because of the fact that Jet Burner will be a very dangerous move to be acquiring. You can't just be untempered with that. And so we excel to the start of My Villain Academia's arc, where we see them both finally get their licenses. The the chapter where they first pull up on the villains ends with Shoto on the ground pulling up the ice, being stable, Bakugo in the air ready to take off, showing their like dynamics again in the personality, in the cold and stationary, but in the dynamic and aggressive in the air, just positioning them further. We constantly get their growth paired together. Their plots have been so intermingled in the sense that they've both always been trying to get ahead, even if one of them isn't necessarily focused on outdoing the other one, because they're consistently doing it, in the same regard that Yuno only started worrying about Asta doing as well as him when the Black Bulls got more stars technically. They had acquired more, but they started from a negative. And so, yeah, this is just, I wanted to kind of like show the way that the typical cliche Naruto-Sasuke rivalry does exist within My Hero Academia, but it exists within Bakugo and Shoto, and it's due to the fact that Bakugo's narrative and Shoto's narratives are both about their characters' psyches for the most part, that we don't look at it and just immediately register, wow, this is actually very much similar to that. And in addition to that, though, because they take very different directions, where Naruto's plot line is very much focused on him becoming a better ninja or getting Sasuke back, and so there's like a mission that's like off the beaten path of Hokage, where in this case, like, they're still just both rushing to be heroes. So there's not like a side mission in that regard where they need to grow in that department. But now that we have a spinoff coming in Giga Jump soon, where My Hero Team Ups will be a thing, and since they got their hero license, we can possibly see random like villain fights for Bakugo, for Shoto, for a lot of the other students that some of us have been like excited for. Tokoyami. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. I'm gonna have to find out if the Viz is gonna be having those Giga Jump issues. I really hope so. I'd love to be able to support it officially, but I will try to do my best to, if it gives us a shaky first chapter or two, I might hold off on doing the deconstructions just in case but I don't think it's gonna do that. It's probably gonna slap, and I'm gonna be more than happy and excited to do that. But I got to admit that things can go wrong, because that's just how it works. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of address the fact that this dichotomy between Bakugo in Shoto is set up in a traditional shonen rivalry standpoint, but written from an outsider's perspective, not from the perspective of one of the characters involved, and that's what makes it turn into a completely different dynamic because we're not seeing their internal struggles as they go through them. We're seeing them hit checkpoints within those struggles, and that's something that I think Horikoshi is doing on purpose because he does value Naruto, but at the same time, he wanted Deku to be a different kind of protagonist, and so he still gave us that. And if you think about it, I think that's a good part of the like subconsciously part of why Bakugo is the most popular character on these polls consistently because at the end of the day he is the most typical shonen protagonist of all of them where he's just focused on being the strongest and trying to achieve his goals. He's like a Goku Naruto fusion a little in that regard. So yeah, that's just my take on that. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts on what I thought Horikoshi was doing with the series, with this particular. There's another rivalry that I'll be talking about. So the next one should be Deku and Shigaraki, which I'll be doing at the end of this arc, so that I can properly kind of go over, all the moments they scale off of each other psychologically and power level wise, but then also make sure that this arc is actually finished, so I know where Shigaraki is supposed to be in our heads as we go forward. Before I make a video about where he is right now when he can be stronger in 2 weeks for all we know. So I think that's all I'm going to say here. This video is mostly just like kind of like my little analysis and takeaway on the character dynamics and the way they're supposed to be like a not necessarily a parody, but like an homage to the shonen trope that it is in that rivalry. And so yeah, I just thought this was a cool detail that I thought that the blonde Sasuke meme kind of like kills out of the story because it's something that Horikoshi took the time to write in, and I think we should actually look at and value and appreciate that. You guys all have a wonderful night. Aniki out.